Oh, I'm so sorry. I know it's just unbelievable the power of the no contact, and even when you don't hear from the person or even sometimes just looking at photographs of them, it could take a long time to recover after that just because it triggers so many flashbacks and memories, so many things that happened in the past that haven't been dealt with, and just all the feelings that were buried are coming up, or like more layers of those feelings are coming up. I'm sorry, I know that's really rough, but you did the right thing to go no contact again. You did the right thing to recognize that's where your power is, in the no contact, and then to go ahead and delete him on everything. That was a really good move, because it just stops the temptation, because it's so easy to get into that moment of idle mind and be like, well, let me just go on Facebook and see what he's doing. And that's just like the beginning of the downward spiral. It's just better not to know. It's better not to see. It's just better not to contact at all. Just, we underestimate the power of that, and I think that when a survivor really understands that the only power you have in this situation is no contact. Like, it is the only power. It's the only way to win the game, is to get out of the game, to not have any contact, to completely opt out of that. And I think it's so hard to conceptualize, because we think like, the normal human response is to communicate. When you're dealing with normal humans, you want to communicate to resolve things. That's the normal human thing to do. So that's why, dealing with narcissists, psychopaths, sociopaths, borderlines, these cluster B personality disorders, like, all rules of normal human interaction do not apply, and following those rules will get you hurt, because they'll set you up for destruction, because those rules, those societal standards that we have, are set up for people who are playing by the rules. And narcissistic abusers do not play by the rules. Manipulative people purposefully avoid the rules, because that's how they want to play. They want to be exempt from those rules. And they know very well the difference between right and wrong. And they just try to, manipulate and bully other people into excusing them for doing wrong, whether it's, some pity story about what they went through and now they just deserve everyone to do what they want, or, they just deny that it happened, deny that they did it, they gaslight the person, and the person ends up doubting themselves. Just that normal rules do not apply. And I think that's why it's so hard, because it's like counterintuitive, because like, your first instinct is to like resolve it, to reach out, to talk about it, to try to come to some kind of resolution, because that's what normal people do. But because they're not normal, that just leads to disaster in every sense of the way. And it's like it's the communication, or even taking a look at them, and that's the biggest sign. It's like when you can look at a photo of someone, or look at a post that they wrote, or even an email or a text or something, when you could just look at that and have no other interaction, just look at that and sense all of that that's coming up, and then all the flashbacks and all the emotions and everything. I mean, that's just a sure sign that you're dealing with a toxic person. That's not a normal human being. It's not how we interact with normal humans. Hello, welcome. We were just talking about no contact, and how important it is to maintain the no contact, because that is the only true sense of power that you have with narcissistic abusers, because all other rules and standards of human interactions do not apply to these kinds of relationships. I see someone new just popped in. I just want to let you know, you can type in the chat. If you see the chat icon below, you can type a message in there if you'd like me to read it anonymously. If you would like to use your voice to ask a question, you can unmute your microphone or your headset, and you can speak. Just keep in mind that the recording will go on YouTube afterwards. So if you do use your voice will be in the recording. If you want to type in the chat, I won't read your name out loud. I'll just read your question and then I can give you an answer. By the way, back to that topic of the no contact and whatnot. Last week, I mentioned that I had seen a video by a psychotherapist who was talking about, we were having the discussion maybe months ago, is it intentional or is it not intentional, the behavior of narcissists? And I was like, well, sometimes it really seems like it's intentional and sadistic, and other times it seems unconscious. And I was telling you that this psychotherapist, I found the video. It is George Simon, Dr. George Simon. He's the author of A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, or I'm sorry, maybe it's just In Sheep's Clothing. And it's about dealing with manipulative people. He calls them character disturbances. And he makes a very clear distinction between people who have neuroses, like normal people who just have neuroses, like anxiety, depression, these sorts of things, or character disturbed people, and how very different the treatment protocols are for these two different kinds of people, and how treatment protocols for neuroses is what comes from like the traditional psychology. And he says, a lot of times people try to apply the traditional psychology to these character disturbances and it doesn't work. And I think he's really on there. And what he says is he makes this distinction between the offensive and defensive behavior. And he says that, a defensive behavior is a defense mechanism. It's what happens when an individual is overcome with, like unbearable emotional grief and pain, denial, for example. Like this is like the abuse amnesia, the denial that you're with an abusive person, the denial that you're accepting the abuse, that sort of thing. It's a result of overwhelming emotional pain that a person can't deal with consciously. So, unconsciously, subconsciously, that gets stuffed down. That's an automatic defensive behavior. That's the neurotic person, right, who develops anxiety and that sort of thing. And the neurotic person is the one with a conscience. The person without a conscience, the character disturbed, as Dr. Simon calls it, is the one who has offensive behavior. And he said that everything that they do is offensive. Manipulation is offensive. It requires the conscious mind. It's not a defensive maneuver. So that really explains how sometimes, we get into this trouble where we develop this empathy for the abuser because we have empathy for human beings. But it's dangerous because this abusive person will play on that. They have selected the victim based on their hyper empathy. And then they'll play on the fact that, well, poor me, it's just so hard to be me. I went through this horrible stuff. So you should just go along with it. You should just do what I want. You should just give me that. Or even like in a work situation, like you should handle all this work because, poor me, I went through all of this, or you should deal with that because poor me. And then the person tends to make excuses for that person or rationalize it and let them go ahead and continue that behavior. And that's where we get into enabling. But that person's behavior, that is offensive. Everything they do is planned. It's not that they're just some poor victim, and it's not a defensive thing. They're not trying to stop the pain from coming in. They're trying to get you to do something. It's an offensive behavior. And that really, really shifted my mind to be able to see it like that and to be able to step out from that empathy and look at that abusive person and recognize that this isn't a defense. There's no attack here. That person is offensive behavior. They're manipulating consciously, no matter how they disguise it, no matter how much of a poor me, victim, martyr they try to paint themselves, they are still doing this consciously. They know that there are societal rules and standards of behavior, but because they have what, Dr. Simon calls a character disturbance, they do it anyways. They choose wrong anyways because they lack that conscience. And that's why they tend to prey, P-R-A-E-Y, right? They tend to prey upon people who have like a hyper sense of conscience, knowing right from wrong, doing the right thing, especially in the work environment, you know, they love to prey on people like that because, you know, especially when your career is in jeopardy, they know that you're going to do the right thing. They know they can screw you over because they can predict that you're going to do the right thing. And that if you do the right thing, they can trap you by doing the wrong thing to hurt you. So I think it's really important, you know, to really understand that these are offensive behaviors. This is a conscious manipulation. Manipulation is always conscious. It is never an unconscious defensive behavior. That was a big reality shift for me. And, you know, I hear a lot of times from people who are in partnerships, you know, and they say, well, it's really awful, and this person is so toxic, and they're abusing me, and they're abusing my kids. And the abuser could be a man or woman. And the victim, you know, goes, but I know they're sick. I know they have a disease. I know they're not well, and I feel bad, and I want to help them. And so you get caught in this space of feeling pity for that person, feeling empathy, sympathy for that person. And then that's where you're in a really dangerous place, because they will take advantage of that. They will absolutely take advantage of that. So that's why normal rules of human interaction, communication, engagement do not apply to these people, because they abuse those rules, and they abuse them consciously while disguising, you know, the fact that it's a conscious attempt. Someone wrote privately here, so they know what they're doing to us. Yeah, they know very well what they're doing. They know very well. They might pretend like they don't. Venus, please go lay down. Thank you. They know very well what they're doing. And they do it anyways. And they do it because they know they can get away with it, because they choose targets and victims based on their empathy, based on their sense of conscience, based on the ability that they can predict with surety that that person is going to do the right thing. So if they know that person's going to do the right thing, they know they can do the wrong thing and get away with it. And that person will then take responsibility for it. And, you know, that's a real eye-opener, because those of us who have tended towards codependency patterns, what this means is that we have put ourselves aside, right? Because both the narcissist and the so-called codependent are dependent on one another. So, you know, the codependent wears that label of dependent, but let's look at reality. The narcissist is absolutely dependent on other people for narcissistic supply. They cannot survive without it. They just don't want to admit how dependent they are. The mark of the codependent is that they take on all the responsibility. They take on the blame. They take on the fault. They take on the responsibility of everything that's wrong in the relationship, at work. They're the ones picking up, you know, on all of the failures or disasters at work and extra workload and all that mess, because they're going to take on that responsibility. The abuser knows that. They can pick out, they can sense the person who will take on that responsibility, because the whole MO, the modus operandus of the narcissist, the psychopath, the sociopath, the borderline, is to not take responsibility for their actions, to pass that on to other people. So the codependent will take on the responsibility. They will put themselves aside. The codependent will put their own needs, feelings, thoughts, perceptions of reality aside and accept someone else's first. And that's how the codependent gets into that. You know, it's because of that, those patterns that they become targets, you know, and that's why they get selected. And so, you know, that's why the healing path here for those of us who have tended towards the codependency patterns is to recognize that we don't have to take responsibility for everything. Because in a relationship where there's two humans, okay, I own 50% of the responsibility and you own 50% of the responsibility. And that's how it works, whether that is an intimate relationship, a familial relationship, a work relationship, a friendship. Each person owns 50%. Each person comes to that table with 50% responsibility. So for those of us codependents, you know, keep reminding ourselves, I only own 50% responsibility in this relationship. The other 50% is that person. You know, I'm not going to accept more than that. And to keep reminding yourself and to keep checking in with yourself, am I taking on too much responsibility? Am I taking on too much blame? Am I taking on too much fault? Am I covering for that person? Am I allowing that person to dump all that on me? You know, and the other part being, am I listening to myself? Am I listening to my intuition? Does my body tell me something? Does my mind tell me something? Do I sense this energetic spiritual feeling about something? Do I perceive something to be reality? And am I stuffing that down because someone else is rationalizing and trying to get me to see a different point of view? Because you know how narcissists are. They love to come with the rationalizations, and the rationalizations are usually very sound. There's plausible deniability. Can't really argue with them because it sounds so perfect on the surface, but underneath it's total bullshit, because it's just a superficial thing. There's nothing real there. There's no real feeling there. There's no reality there. It's just a rationalization that they use to get into your mind so that you go along with it, so that you make excuses for them, just like they're making excuses for them, and why they don't have to follow the societal standards of behavior. I noticed several more people just joined. Welcome. As always, you guys can type questions in the chat if you would like me to read them anonymously. I won't read your name. These will be on YouTube afterward. If you would like to use your voice, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question with your headset or your microphone. Just please keep in mind that your voice will then be on the YouTube recording afterwards. Okay, nice to see you again. Nice to see you too. Do you think that a narcissist, from his or her point of view, can understand the victim's final no contact decision as just a temporary silent treatment? Do I think that the narcissist perceives the no contact as a silent treatment? Yeah, because that's what they're doing, right? That's their behavior, and they're using the silent treatment as a form of punishment. It's used to punish you if you call out their behavior and they don't want to address it, if you do something where you're not, being submissive to their demands and their whims and their expectations, if you somehow break the order, if you set a new boundary and you're like, no, that's not going to fly anymore. And they're like, what? You always accepted that. They expect the same they do. Yes. So when you go no contact, they assume you're punishing them, and so that's why they get so upset, because you're now using what looks to be the same weapon that they used against you, which, if you look at all of the strategies for dealing with a narcissist, what you find is that every single one of them is an inversion of what the narcissist does. The counter manipulation strategy is essentially taking what they do and flipping it back on them. And like the no contact, the silent treatment, that's exactly what that is. And so that's why they get so desperate. And that's how you know immediately if that person is toxic. Like some people, they're not really sure yet, or maybe they don't want to accept yet. And it's okay, so set the boundary, go no contact. You'll see. And at first, maybe it's like, hey, baby, I really miss you. I really love you. Hey, baby, what are you doing? And it starts out real gentle and sweet like this. But the more you hold your boundary, the more desperate they become. And how quickly do their colors come out? Because they will paint themselves immediately. It'll go from, I love you, I miss you, where are you, to, I can't believe you. How dare you? I have never done this to you. How could you do this to me? You are an awful person. You are this. And it goes from that to that very quickly. And then it becomes very obvious how toxic that person is, even if this is a friend. The quickest way to find out if you have a toxic person in your life, even if it's just a friend, is to set the no contact boundary. Make up some excuse like you're really busy with work or family or, whatever. And you just need time to yourself and see how they react, because immediately you'll find out. You'll see immediately. Do you have more question about that? Does that help you understand your question, or would you like to ask something more about that? Yes, it helped, or yes, you have more? Okay, good. Another question. Go ahead. Does a narcissist behave the same toward his or her main supply, husband or direct family, than towards a secondary supply? Well, they have similar tendencies, but their main supply, which is their main enabler, they're going to do some things different to that person versus the so-called secondary supply. If you've read the book Psychopath Free, he talks about how a narcissist courts the long-term victim versus the temporary victim. A narcissist is usually very good at meeting a person and being able to ascertain, is this person a long-term enabler? Are they going to continually make excuses and defend my behavior and put up with it and forgive it? Or is this person only going to do that for a short period of time and then they're going to be out? And depending on how they gauge that is how they're going to approach that person. So from the very beginning, the idealization phase with the long-term supply is going to be much longer. They're going to invest a lot longer in the idealization because they want this person to stick around for the long haul. So they really need that person to have this illusion that they're with this amazing person, this amazing partner. Wow, they're just so lucky, and on and on and on, and like deep, deep, deep in there. And that could go on for a long, long time. Like a lot of people that I've heard from who got into these marriages talk about years and years, even like decades sometimes, of not really seeing the negative behavior. Like, even though the idealization is negative, most of us didn't recognize that at the beginning. It was too intensive. We didn't recognize that. It felt so good, right? Because somebody was complimenting you, somebody was paying attention to you, that sort of thing. They're going to invest a lot longer in that idealization phase than they will with that temporary supply. The temporary supply might get a couple months, before it flips now it becomes cruel and mean and devaluing a lot quicker. They are going to be much more willing to stick around, this long-term person. So they're going to be much more willing to put up with things from that person too. Like maybe the enabler, tries to set some boundaries and defend themselves, and the narcissist, they'll figure out how to manage that such that the person won't go away, but they still won't, they'll give the person kind of what they think the person wants, it's just enough so that they stay there and want to keep investing. But again, it's because they've put in such a long term idealization versus the temporary short term that they put in with the supply. And they know that the temporary supply is temporary. So they know that if that temporary supply starts to get too much self-esteem and self-worth and believing that they don't have to put up with all the bullshit, the narcissist might just discard them because it might be too much of a headache for them. It's easier to find another temporary supply. They're much more willing to cut that off. The narcissist cannot cut off that main enabler. They won't do it unless that person is like all out revolting, but they usually also won't cut that person off until they have someone else lined up. They tend to have like this lobby of people that they're constantly, gauging who's going to fit into what role and who they'll get what from. They almost never walk away from that. They might, even the narcissist might be miserable in that marriage. I've heard this from narcissists before where they're so miserable in their marriage, but they stay. They refuse to leave, because they're getting something from that person. They're getting that continual enabling from that person, the excuse making. They constantly have someone there who's going to take their shit, who's always going to be there for them. And so no matter what happens out here with these, temporary short-term supplies, they know they can always go back to that person. So if they have to choose between the two, so say a narcissist, starting to have an affair with this temporary supply, and after months and months, the temporary supply is like, okay, so are you going to leave your wife or your husband yet? We're supposed to be together. You said we're soulmates. So what's the deal? What's going to happen? If this person starts demanding too much, the narcissist will cut them out because they will choose that long-term enabler over that short-term. They know this person is much easier to replace, and they can't replace that person until they have cultivated, this whole big idealization phase. And that's a lot harder. It's also a lot harder to find that extreme codependent enabler. I'm not sure if you've read the book by Ross Rosenberg, the psychotherapist. It's called The Human Magnet Syndrome. He talks about the continuation of self. It's a scale, a continuum that he created where like +5 is like the extreme narcissist, -5, like the extreme codependent. And then most people being in the middle somewhere. So 0 straight in the middle, and like +1, -1, +2, -2, the extreme end, right? The extreme narcissist, the extreme codependent. That extreme codependent is the one that they're looking for to be there as that long-term enabler. Someone says here, my ex was amazing in the initial stages. Gradually, without me even noticing, he presented himself to me, continuing the game with everybody else in our family and friend circle. Years later, I still hear what a nice, charming person he is. Yes, now you were married to him. You were married to him long term. So yeah, it sounds like, you know, he was able to maintain that faith. Like that person who's there as the long-term enabler, like the husband, the wife, the long-term enabler, they're definitely going to see who this person is. They're definitely going to reveal themselves to this person. And that's why it's so lonely and terrifying, because, you know, the face that they're presenting to the outside world is that they're this amazing person, you know, and the only other people who might recognize who they really are these short-term supplies. Like say they have these little affairs with people, and then these people end up standing up and not taking that anymore. And as soon as they stand up, they realize what's going on. So the narcissist has to get rid of them because nothing can jeopardize their reputation in the community. You know, everybody is in love with them. That's why it's so hard to leave. That's why every victim feels like they're crazy, because it's like, you know what's going on, and you see it in your relationship with this person, but then, you know, and they're like this monster with you. Like even narcissistic parents to their children, they're like this monster, and that's what the child sees. And then someone else appears and they're like, "Rawr. Hi, how are you? Oh, so great." And they just put on, it's like the face flips. They're this whole different personality. The person who's being abused is like, can't believe what's happening, right? Like nobody realizes. You feel like you're crazy. You feel so alone. It's unbelievable. So yeah, in terms of the long-term supply, the short-term supply, there are some differences. They're still the same patterns because they are that person. It's just that, you know, the mask that they wear also differs slightly person to person, right? Because again, the narcissist is very keen at guessing what each person needs. And whatever you need, they will hone in on that, and they will come in as the savior, giving you that, whether it's approval, love, love, right? Affection, telling you that you're beautiful, telling you that you're attractive. Maybe it's finances, so they're giving you money. Whatever it is, they're going to hone in on that. And that varies person to person, but they know exactly what to do, and they know how to switch their mask, and they listen to what's important to you, and then they start feeding back the words to you that you're using. Like if you're a spiritual person and you're talking about soulmates and twin flames, they're going to hear that, and they're going to start talking about, how their soul feels about you, and their soul, and they're literally going to play on those words. So if you're the main person and maybe that's not your thing, they're not going to talk to you like that. So you're going to see there are some differences, in that way, and how they treat people. But that's just based on how they know exactly what you need and who you are, what you need to hear, so they can take advantage of you. Someone wrote here, I believe that he was truly insecure, leading to his own unhappiness and loneliness in the end. I divorced him many years ago. He died November last year. My daughter says that he was the loneliest person she knew. That's really sad. That's really sad. Maybe he just didn't find enough people to put up with his bullshit in the end, and that's why he was so lonely. I mean, the thing about narcissists, psychopaths, sociopaths is that they never truly get to experience emotional intimacy like normal human beings. They never get to experience that because they aren't capable of those kinds of emotions. They're only capable of tapping into the primal emotions like fear, anxiety, excitement, like that sort of thing. But that deeper emotional intimacy and connection, which, I mean, why else are we here? Like, why else are we living if not to have these experiences and to be able to share them with one another? And they never get to share that. And that's a very, very, very lonely existence. You know, again, not a reason to have pity for them or to feel bad for them or to enable their abuse, because there is no excuse for abusing someone. You know, just because you were abused and hurt does not give you right to abuse someone else. And that's the game they play, you know, is, well, I should get away with this because of what I went through. And it was so bad what I went through. No pity from my side at all. Yeah, that's good. But sometimes it's really hard to not have that pity, because being an empathic person, you hear somebody's story of pain and suffering and you just want to help. You just want to feel bad. You just want to love them and hug them. And, you know, and that's the danger with these people. So back to the person who asked that original question, does the narcissist behave the same toward the main supply and the secondary supply? Does that kind of clear that up for you? Do you have any more questions about that? The hoovering is also oriented to the weak points they know of each person. I do not have pity because I have knowledge and everything is very predictable. Good. So you have the knowledge of the patterns. Now you see the patterns. You're not going to put up with these patterns anymore because you recognize them. You're not falling for the pity ploys. That's good. Yes. So the hoovering is also oriented exactly toward the weak points. So whatever it was that person needs, excuse me, if they needed approval, the hoovering is going to be about approval. You're so beautiful, you're so attractive, you're so intelligent, whatever they wanted approval about. If it's about finances, the hoovering will be like, I'd really like to help you. I've got some money here. I know you want it, you know, that kind of thing. Like the hoovering is always going to depend on that. Same thing as the idealization, because that's what the hoovering is. The hoovering is like, it's like an expedited version of the idealization and devaluation, because the hoovering starts off as the idealization. And when you don't respond favorably to that, it flips very quickly to the devaluation. You know, like the cruelty and the anger and the hatred comes out if you don't give in, if you don't accept the help, if you don't accept whatever they're trying to do. Someone says, ordered the book, expected delivery, date mid-June. Good. Yeah, I guess it takes a really long time for it to arrive abroad on Amazon. I'm surprised they didn't have it locally for you, but I'm glad you got it. It'll be there, I guess, in a couple weeks, a few weeks maybe. It's a really great book. If you guys haven't read that yet, Psychopath Free, Jackson McKenzie. The person before this who was asking the question, you know, you mentioned that you can see everything is very predictable. And once you see those patterns, and that's the advantage of that book, Psychopath Free, is it he just makes it so clear. Like, here's the patterns, you know, here's all the little things that are going to happen, and here's the big picture. And once a survivor can recognize that, or even a victim when they're still in it, once you recognize those patterns, that is like, wow. I mean, it's enlightening because you can see it, but it's also empowering because you realize this is predictable. Like, and you start to see it for what it is, and suddenly it starts to lose its power over you. Because before you realize the patterns, it was just like you're constantly being knocked around. The ground beneath you was constantly shifting. It was constantly chaos and confusion, and couldn't figure it out. Once you see those patterns, it's like, oh yeah, right? Someone says here, I'm trying to go no contact and I'm getting constant hoovering, relating to the predictable patterns that you were talking about. Good for you on going no contact. That's great. Is this the first time that you're trying the no contact and getting the constant hoovering? So I'm guessing in the hoovering, it starts off, right, as I love you, I miss you, whatever they're trying to flatter. And then if you hold yourself on the boundary of no contact, then it starts to get mean and cruel, right? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So good job on no contact. You know, this is the ideal way forward. We were talking earlier in the session today, and we talk about this a lot because this is really the key. the key for every survivor to understand is the no contact. It's like that, the center pinpoint around which everything else revolves, right? In the healing process, in the separation process, in the moving forward and thriving in your life process, that key pin is the no contact, because that is the source of your power. That is the source of your empowerment. Like, the knowledge is great, right? But knowledge is potential power. Potential power. It only becomes real power when you put it into action. And no contact is that action. That's the first action, right? It's setting that boundary, going no contact, which is ideal, right? In cases, of course, for people who have children with narcissists, or sometimes children of narcissists, or maybe you're still working in an environment with a narcissist and you can't leave yet. In those kinds of situations, that's when you have to go with the minimum contact and very clear boundaries, and that is a lot harder to manage those boundaries. It's a big, big, big lesson in creating, setting, and enforcing boundaries. For people who don't have a child with a narcissist, or aren't stuck in a job with a narcissist, or don't have a narcissistic family member that they're still hoping and trying to have some kind of relationship with, for people who don't have that kind of connection, the ideal way forward is no contact, because it just makes it a lot easier. That is your only source of power, is saying, I'm not going to play that game, because it is a game. And that game is set up for them to win. They set their game up to win. Like that's the whole goal of that game, is for them to win. No one else should win that game. So if you play that game, you're automatically volunteering to be the loser, to be hurt, to be abused, to be exploited, because that's how the game goes. And so the only way out of that game is to walk off the field, to go no contact, and taking all your power back. And as I was also mentioning earlier, no contact also means like not looking at their Facebook page, not looking at their social media, not looking at photos, because just seeing an image, seeing a photo will trigger all that emotion, will trigger flashbacks, and you'll be back in it so fast, like a rubber band, just like yanking you right back, and you don't even realize what happened, even after like all this progress happened in the no contact. That's why it's so important. She says, he tries everything to get me to reply to his text messages. He has tried being sweet, unconditional love, telling me he won't contact me anymore. Then he tells me what a terrible person I am and uses guilt. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's uncanny from one person to the next how similar this is. Like, how very similar, especially when they're like, oh, I'm not going to contact you anymore. And then that's supposed to get you, I guess, to be like, no, wait, don't go. But when you don't, then that's when they come back with, you're just so awful. Like, it would just be, I can't imagine what it's like to be married to a person like you. It must be horrible, and like just making you feel like you have no sense of self-worth. Therefore, you should just accept the way they're treating you, because you're not worth anything. He's trying every trick in the book. Yes, they do. And that's what will happen when you go no contact. That's why it's so hard, because they will try every trick in the book. And first, they're going to start with those things that they know will get you to respond. The guilt trick always gets me to respond. Yeah. So he knows what gets you, because you have such a sense of conscience, right? That's why the guilt works. Guilt only works on people who have a conscience, right? If you have a hyper sense of conscience, like, you definitely know right from wrong, and you predictably will pick right, because that's who you are. You always do the right thing, even if, it might be self-effacing or self-sacrificing, and you do that right thing and the abusive person counts on that, then they know they can twist you and manipulate you with the guilt. So good job on the no contact, on staying strong, because it is not easy. Like you said, when every trick in the book is coming at you, and when he knows exactly how to hook you, that's really hard. It's really hard to remember who you are. It's really hard to remember what the reality is. And it's really hard to remember that you deserve better. You are worth more than that. That person does not define who you are. That person does not define your sense of self-worth and your worth in this world. That has to come from inside you. And that's what you got to keep reminding yourself, like, I would recommend, if those texts are still coming through, can you block him like entirely? Is that possible? Sometimes, of course, they'll get on someone else's phone, or they'll get a burner phone. We call them burners. People can go to certain places and get like a cheap unregistered phone, doesn't have their name, whatever, and they pay as they go. People do this all the time, and they'll try to, hoover that way. If you get a brand new phone number, he doesn't find you. Like, he doesn't text you anymore. He can't call you, not from 1,000 different, phone numbers or anything. It's a really easy way just to wipe that off. So I would recommend blocking if possible, just because it makes your job easier. It is hard enough to remember that you don't want to respond to that. You don't want to get into that. And sometimes it's really easy not to respond to the positive hoovering. I love you. I miss you. You're wonderful. The hardest part not to respond to sometimes is mean stuff, because you want to defend yourself. And that is the trap. That is the trap. As soon as you catch yourself defending yourself, that's when you know you're caught. You're caught in the hook, right? As soon as you start defending yourself. So this can happen in society, just with manipulative people in general, who don't necessarily have to be narcissists, but, maybe you're at work and this person, just they target you a lot. Maybe they don't really have all the characteristics of a narcissist or something, but they always hook you on that, and they get you to start defending yourself. And that's where you're stuck. That's where you're trapped. That's where, once you're focused on self-defense, they can do anything, because you're wasting an enormous amount of energy. You're exhausting yourself, so always flip that around. And always remind yourself, as soon as you catch yourself defending yourself, flip it around so that you're looking at the other person instead of yourself. Because again, the codependent pattern is to look inside, to take all the responsibility on oneself, to take all the blame on oneself, to ask, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? What can I do to make it better, right? So the hard part for the codependent is to remember, whoa, I don't have to defend myself here. Why am I defending myself against this? What are you actually doing? And to flip it back outside again. It's difficult because he lives around the corner from me, and I am very good friends with his brother and his wife. Worried about bumping into him in my local shops. I'm also getting abuse amnesia too. So for the abuse amnesia, I always recommend, that people will write down the abuse that took place. Not to focus on that, and to dwell on that and stuff like that, but have a notebook, which you can close. Abuse takes place, to write those things down, because when you get into that place where you're, and you're starting to doubt again or make excuses for that person, then you set up the trigger in your mind. As soon as that happens, go to the notebook and open the notebook and start reading and keep reading until you get to that reality check again, where you're like, right? Or do you also have a support network in your life, like trusted family and friends that don't have anything to do with him, who know what happened, and who don't want you to be with that person, and recognize that that was an unhealthy situation? Can you go talk to them to get a reality check and just be honest? Be like, look, I really need a reality check. I'm having second guessing again, self-doubts. Can you give me a reality check? Just remind me why I'm not supposed to be with that person. Remind me why I don't want to go back to that person. And they can remind you about the abuse, right? The abusive things. Like, do you really want someone to treat you like that? No, I don't. Okay, good. Right? And so you remember that. And the fact that you live near him, that is really, really difficult. Really, really difficult, because that hypervigilance part of the PTSD is probably really strong. Like, you're probably like, you walk outside the house and you're like, where is he? Right? Like, the fact that you're friends with his brother and his wife, that's really dangerous, because, the flying monkeys thing, right? And those people are his people. They're related to him. And quite likely, even if they know who that person is, quite likely they will take his side. Quite likely they will take any information they can gather about you and give that to him to use against you. So I know it really sucks when, you know, you're separating, especially if you've been with this person for a long time and you have like these friends in common, you know, and then the family overlap and whatnot. And that's a really hard thing, you know, because they've become part of your life. But the reality is that those people are really on his side and you can't trust them. They're not trustable because they could end up, you know, putting you in danger, and they could end up confusing you more, and they could end up trapping you in that abuse cycle. And it's usually much better to cut those people out of your life, you know, and to consider that collateral damage to the narcissist, the psychopath, the sociopath. Regarding reality test, yes, I have a couple of friends who see through him and a therapist. Good. Yes, I think they want us to stay together. Right. Right. So it's good that you have the friends who see through him. Those are the people that you want to count on, and your therapist. That's great. It sounds like your therapist gets it, understands this is an abusive relationship, is not, you know, encouraging you to engage and work it out, which is what a therapist who doesn't understand narcissism and psychopathy will say. A therapist who has no experience with the cluster B personality disorders, these character disturbances, as Dr. Simon calls it, you know, that therapist will again, they'll be playing by the usual rules of human engagement, of human interaction, which is communicate and work things out and keep working it out and keep talking and keep engaging until you can work it out. Those rules do not apply to the cluster B personality disordered people, because they don't play by those rules, and they will take advantage of you if you are playing by those rules or have these preconceived ideas that all humans play by those rules. They will destroy you simply by your belief in that. So it's good that your therapist is supportive and is reminding you about the reality test. So, you know, and these friends that you have. So definitely get that reality check. When you catch yourself going into that abuse amnesia, and how do you know you're going into the abuse amnesia? Excuse making, rationalization, second guessing, confusion, self-doubt. All of these are signs that you're sliding back into the abuse amnesia. That's when you want to go get the reality check, you know. And so, you know, you also mentioned here that these people from his life want you to stay together. Of course they do. Either they don't see what's going on with him because, you know, they're part of the people where he's maintaining the mask and they don't get who he is, or worse yet, they could also be narcissists, you know, and that's a very, very, very dangerous game to play. You know, when there's multiple ones ganging up on you, very, very, very dangerous to your health and sanity. You know, you might not be in physical danger, but that is very dangerous to your sanity, to the reality of the situation. So again, I know it really sucks because you might have known them years or decades, you know, but getting them out of your life because they are connected to the narcissist, because they are part of the flying monkey army, is just, it's a lot safer for you, you know, to instead to focus on your friends, on the people in your life, on, you know, working with your therapist, you know, to have these healthy interactions and healthy relationships, and to get those reality checks. Someone says here, oh, thanks, Meredith, regarding the abuse amnesia, it's also the hope that if I try again, I can make things better. I know. And they are banking on that hope. You know, they pre-qualify targets victims for this abuse when the person is extra forgiving, has an extra sense of conscience, right? They always do the right thing. When they have a hyper sense of empathy, you know, they know that they can count on the fact that, you know, you're an optimistic person and you see the good in people and you want to see the good in the world and you have hope that people will change. And the whole thing is that when you're dealing with cluster B personality disorders, when you're dealing with character disturbances, you're dealing with people who don't want to change. If they wanted to change, their actions would show that. But their actions are repeatedly showing that they don't want to play by the societal rules that the rest of us are playing by. Therefore, they don't want to change. When you have seen that behavior 2, 3 times, That wasn't a mistake. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. You know, it happens, right? When you see that repeating 2 or 3 times, that's when you know that person does not want to change. That person expects to get away with it, right? So there is no hope to make it better. Once you see that in action, it doesn't matter what that person is saying, because they'll say all sorts of things to get you to want to have more hope, to get you to feel sympathy or empathy for them, to get you to forgive them, to get you to rationalize an excuse, make why they did that. That will only put you in jeopardy. That will get you nowhere good. That will not lead you in the direction of health and sanity, right? And they'll always bank on the fact that hope dies last. They'll always bank on the fact that you're going to have that shred of hope in them. And all they have to do is stoke that hope just a little bit, and you'll be willing to give it another try, right? So that's the danger. That is not a negative quality that you have. It just happens to be that these people with character disturbances target people with those good qualities because they know they can take advantage of them. They know they can take advantage of them predictably. I won't be free until he gets someone else. That's possible that he will continue to try until he finds someone else. But what you need to understand is your power here. Your power is that as you keep saying no and you just shut it off and shut it off, now you live near him, right? So if you shut off and you change your number and everything, chances are he's going to try to come around physically, right? Which is, you can't answer the door, you can't entertain any of that. There just has to be a flat no, like a big no on any. I mean, even you're walking down the street or you're driving, do not stop. Don't stop your car. Don't stop your body. Keep moving. Like, I think, one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of us is that we feel like we have to be polite. And so you see it and they're like, hey, and they're trying to flag you down. They're calling you by name. And in maybe you even grew up like this, where like you hear your name and you have to stop and drop everything you're doing and run to that parent and what can I do? What can I do? What do you need? Right. And so as an adult, sometimes we're still in this behavior, and you got to get that straight and be like, you don't owe him anything. If you're in your car and you have your window down and you're like driving to work and he's flagging you down, you just keep on going. And you didn't hear him. The music is on, didn't hear him, whatever, or just don't even look at him. Just keep your eyes on the road. If you're walking in the neighborhood and, he tries to like stop you, just keep on walking. Like, make sure your body is moving away from him. Make sure your body language is directed away from him. Like, if you happen to be standing there and somehow he just happened to sneak up on you, then immediately turn yourself away. Because like typically in a conversation, we face one another, like your feet are facing the person, your hips are facing the person. That's when you know a person is engaged with you, is that they're facing with you. When someone isn't engaged with you and they're not paying attention to that conversation, don't want to be part of it, their feet and their hips will be facing another direction. That's the direction they're going. They're not really into paying attention to you. You need to use that tactic against these people. Keep moving away from them. Turn your body away from them so that you're not facing them. Just don't stop. Like, keep moving away. You don't owe him anything. You don't even owe him, hey, how's it going? You might just go, hey, and keep on going, just because that's like, maybe this for you was like what you have to do to your body to tell yourself like, okay, I addressed it and I'm keeping on going. Don't give in to that. He will find someone else, because the more your boundary says no, 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 and it's so solid that he finally gets that he's not going to get you to change your mind and to second guess your boundary, that he's not going to get you to feel guilty for having that boundary. He will have to find someone else. He will have to, as a matter of survival. That's what narcissists do. They seek supply. If you're not giving it and you're just no, 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 and he's not getting the supply through secondary sources like his friends, your neighbors, or whatever, if he's not getting any of that, he's going to have to find someone else. And it does get a lot easier when they get someone else, but the most important part is your boundaries, because the more your boundary says no, the more they have to go somewhere else. Let me just catch up here on a few things people were saying. Someone said here, yes, I have a list and I still make new entries, 35 entries right now. Is that about the abuse? I'm so sorry. I didn't see that earlier. Are these entries in your notebook about the abuse? Yes. Awesome. Good. Good. I really recommend that people do this, especially in the initial phases of separation, when you're still second guessing, when you're still self-doubting, when you're still confused, that sort of thing, when you still forget and still idealize who that person was at the beginning. If you catch yourself going, well, if he or she would just be like they were in the beginning, or if he or she would just be like they were when they were being good, because I know they're capable of being good, that's danger, because all of that was an illusion. None of that was who that person really is. It was just the mask. The big picture is the flip-flop between sweet and mean, kind and cruel, idealization, devaluation. That's the big picture. It's not isolated. And that's the danger in the abuse amnesia, is that we will isolate. We'll isolate only the good qualities and we'll just never mind all this, right? But we have to look at the big picture. So when you catch yourself doing that, you're getting into the abuse amnesia. Keep a notebook, write it down, and share that notebook with your friends. If you are still in it, if you are still physically in the environment with the abusive person, you do not want to keep that notebook on your person in your house, because chances are very, very, very high that they are going through everything. They're going through your computer, they're going through your phone when you're sleeping, they're going through your notebooks when you're at work, they're going through everything. You can't keep that stuff at home. You got to give that to someone you love and trust, a close family member who is not toxic, a close friend who is not toxic, someone who is safe and healthy, and trust that person. And then also that's your person to go to when you need a reality check. And in that book, Psychopath Free, he talks about having a constant in your life. A constant is that person, or even your dog. Like my dog is a great constant for me. Someone in your life who is healthy and sane. And when you're with this person, you always feel good. You always feel good together. Your interactions always leave both of you feeling better than you felt before. Okay, that's a constant. That person knows you. That person loves you and respects you. When you interact with that person and you feel a certain way about yourself, you feel a certain way about life, you go off from that conversation feeling a certain way, right? Which is good. That's your constant. That's you. That's how you know who you are. Then you go and interact with the toxic person and you feel like crap. You feel exhausted, you feel drained, you're self-doubting, you feel self-conscious, you feel worthless. That's not a healthy person. So the constant is, the reality check. How do I feel when I'm with this person? How do I feel when I'm with my constant? So if I feel like I feel when I'm with my constant, with this new person or this person who's in my life, I know that's a healthy person. If I don't feel like that, that's not a healthy person. Right? So have that constant in your mind, in your life, and count on them. Someone else right here, page 1 of notebook, notes to self, things you should do to stay strong, regain your strength. That's an excellent, excellent idea. Things you can do to stay strong, like get reality checks with people who love you, because that's one of the worst parts about this kind of psychological abuse is the psychological isolation. Sometimes they physically isolate you. Physical abusers will do this. They'll move a victim away from friends and family. They'll get rid of their cell phone. They'll do something to physically isolate them. Psychological abusers want to psychologically isolate you from the perspectives of other people. Because if you tell the story to other people, healthy people are going to go, oh, that's not okay. There's nothing okay about that. Even if they don't know what a narcissist is or a psychopath and they don't know about narcissistic abuse, they'll hear that story and they'll go, something's not right. And if they plant that idea in your mind, you might realize what's going on. So the abuser does not want you to have outside perspective. So one of the biggest tools you need to have is that support network, those people who love you and support you, who you could go to when you need to get a reality check, when you need to remember that you're strong, because you'll feel beaten down by the abuse and you'll feel weak and you'll feel worthless, right? And so that's why you got to have people in your life who can remind you who you are, because sometimes you can't do it for yourself. Sometimes, you just can't get there because you're so stuck in it. And that's why you need someone else to reach in and remind you and pull you out of that perspective. And other things you can do to regain your strength too, so whatever activities that make you feel strong, whether it's like, maybe it's taking care of your body and going to the gym, or, whatever it is that makes you feel strong and reminds you how strong you are, that kind of thing. And you're like overcoming something, overcoming fears, overcoming challenges, reaching goals, these kinds of things make you feel strong. And the stronger you feel in your physical body, the stronger you feel in your mind, and that's the thing, because it's like the mind is so intangible. And that's why this abuse is so insidious, because you can't really put your finger on it. And there's no bruise, there's no broken bone, there's no physical wound usually to show for. And that's why it's so hard to realize what's going on, just as it's equally hard to get in contact with your inner strength, because again, it's intangible. So if you make it more tangible, you use your body to recover that strength, to remind yourself how strong you are, doing things to overcome with your body, then you remind your mind just how strong you are. And having those people in your life, that is so key. What else is going on here? And if we come back to the dose, some kindness again, very predictable. Yeah, they are very predictable with that, and that the kindness is the key to the Stockholm syndrome, right? When there is someone who's being held captive or someone who's being abused, the Stockholm syndrome requires that the abuser or the captor extends a small shred of kindness. And that's all they have to do to get the victim to have empathy for the abuser again. And that's why it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous, like not to accept help. Don't accept the kindness. And it's really hard because when you see kindness, it looks really nice. You want to accept it. And then you want to accept the person who extended that kindness to you. And that's really, really, really dangerous. It is so confusing. I made a video a while ago about piercing the denial, and the story about a woman who was raped, and it was really, really bad. But then the guy afterward offered her a ride to the train station. And that small act of kindness was enough to make her fall in love with him. And then the same exact thing happened to her friends with his friends. They got raped, they got a ride to the train station, and they all fell in love with their rapists. So that is how powerful that act of kindness is. It can confuse you. Do not accept kindness from abusive people. Don't accept it, because that's what puts you in danger. That's what makes you vulnerable to the abuse. And yes, it is very predictable. I guess the text messages are a sign that he hasn't changed. Correct. When you see that happening, that is a sign the person has not changed. They might tell you whatever they want to tell you. Oh, baby, I'm working so hard. I changed. I really am different. I am different now. I changed. You'll see. I want to be the best me for you and me. I want to do better. They'll say anything. They'll say everything. They don't care. They don't care. They will say anything to hook you again. And those words are meaningless. Their actions show the truth. If they show those same actions, you're welcome. If they show those same actions over and over again, they're showing you who they are. They're painting themselves. They're not changing. They're unwilling to change, right? It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. And so the actions will always show you who they are, much more than the words. Looks like a couple people had to sign off. No worries. What about you guys left? Any other questions that you have? These are really great questions today. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing these. You're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions I can answer for you guys? I think today you guys are really hitting on like the key struggles that every survivor goes through when they're trying to get out. The no contact, the hoovering, the acts of kindness, the hope that things will change. Like these are the key patterns that you see in survivors getting out of these situations. And these are the key struggles, the key things to understand. What else? What else can I help you guys with? Any other questions? Oh, okay, here's one, private. How long does it take to get over breaking no contact? I think that depends on the person, on the situation, and on how far your healing was before you broke no contact. So, for example, if you had been, adamantly no contact for a really long time and feeling really solid about it, and you were pretty much past the point of obsession where you weren't thinking constantly about the person, having constant flashbacks and that sort of thing, one little glimpse, it could take 24 hours. Maybe you just looked at their Facebook page and then you felt this low, you know, sense of self-worth, this low energy for 24 hours or so, and then you're back at it. If you contacted them, if you had interaction with them, it could be much longer. So there was someone I mentioned last week, who had just taken a look at a photo of his ex, and it probably took him, almost 2 weeks to really come out of that. That can happen. Usually it's significantly worse when you actually have the interaction, when you exchange text messages, exchange emails, or worse yet, see the person. That could take longer to get over. Again, it also depends like how strong you were feeling before you broke no contact, how far along, you were in that recovery process before that happened, afterward in the recovery. And also sometimes people need to do that where they break the no contact again because they still haven't totally resolved it. Like maybe they were like obsessed and then they break the no contact, and then it's so horrible, whatever happens or whatever the person says, that it finally shatters what was left of the denial. And now the person, it's like, oh man, they're so clear about what happened that there is like no shred of doubt yet left about the no contact. When there is like no shred of doubt that like you made the right decision, that person is not going to change, there is no hope left. Once you get to that point, it's pretty quick to recover. But it takes people sometimes that really drastic, hard experience to get to that point. She also said, I used to think about his cheating and porn use. And when I broke no contact and I brought it up to him, he turned it around and said that I have a one-track mind, no accountability at all. He got worse. I meant nothing to him ever. Yeah. So when they turn it back around on you, and if that really gets to you, if those words really hurt you and you're self-doubting yourself, like, well, maybe it is my fault that he was watching porn all the time and didn't want to have sex with me and would rather jerk off watching porn. Or, maybe it was my fault that he didn't want to have sex with me when I wanted to have sex with him, but instead he had sex with these other people. If you're self-doubting on yourself, then it's going to be harder to heal. If you look at what he said to you and you're like, yeah, that's not me. That's not me. That's all him, because I own the responsibility of my part and he's owning no responsibility and he never will. And the way he's even framing the one-track mind like that, that's really just a projection of him. He has a one-track mind, right? His one-track mind is sex and many different sources and novelty and, multiple supply. And you were his person. Like you were the person that he was supposed to have that intimate relationship with. And like you said, you realized that you meant nothing to him, because if you did mean something to him, he wouldn't have gone out and done that. He wouldn't have needed porn like that. He wouldn't have abused porn. He wouldn't have gone out and had sex with all these people, because you were his person. That's not going to change. His perspective about that is not going to change. He's not going to say he was sorry because he doesn't think he did anything wrong. He believes he's entitled to do that. He believes you're wrong and you should just make excuses for it because whatever, because he's a man, which is not necessarily the case because not all men are like that. But whatever his thing is, whatever his shtick is, or he's just really stressed and that's what he needs, or you weren't as adventurous in bed as all these people who are willing to do, all this really wild stuff. And so it's your fault. You need to get over that part and accept the fact that that wasn't about you. That was about him. Those are his problems. That's his projection. The one-track mind, that's his mind. That's what he wants. He isn't capable of those deeper, intimate, emotional connections with another human, which you are, which you deserve. You deserve to have that kind of connection with someone. He will never have that. He will never be able to have that. He doesn't want it. He would rather have the superficial sexual relationships and keep it there, and have multiple of those relationships so that he's never counting on one source of supply. I'm not self-doubting. I'm just shocked that he got worse in every way. Clearly, I never knew him. That is the shocker for, pretty much everybody. Once they realize who that person is and you realize like, wow, I don't even know who that person was all those years. Sometimes it's just months, but when it's the case of like years, that's when it's really shocking. Like, I know in your case it was years. It's so shocking because you're like, you're with this person for so long. How is it possible that he hid it or she hid it, all this time? It's a huge shock, huge shock. How could they even hide that? Right. But there is a self-doubt there, right? Because there is like the part of you who knew him as this, and the part of you now who's seeing him as who he really is. And the part of you who now is accepting that is who he is, that is who he was all along. He might seem worse now. It's just because now he has nothing to lose. Like, he's lost you. So he has nothing, he's not going to try, to hoover you into the idealization thing. He knows that's over. He knows you get it. He knows the game is up. There's no tricking you back, so you're seeing the real him now, who he really is. I lived a lie, and that is what hurt me, that I was duped for so long. Yeah, that's the pain, is like, how could I have loved and lived with this person for so long and not notice that about them? Like, how could they have hid that for so long? Like, how is it even possible? It is. Like, that's who these people are. And it just, I'm sorry that, that it had gone on for so long. It's devastating. It's so devastating when years of investment go by, and thinking who that person is and realizing who they're not. And it's really good that you get it now. Like, you understand, in your words, he has no accountability and you meant nothing to him. And as sad as that is to recognize, as hard as that is to accept, because on the other side of that acceptance is the shame, right? The shame of having been in it, having not seen it, or having seen glimpses and made excuses, right? Because we all were there. And the big part of that acceptance is the shame of it. Forgive yourself for that, because you did nothing wrong. You believed in him because you believe in the good of others. You believe in the good of human beings. You believe and hope that people will do the right thing because that's what you do, because you have a sense of conscience. You know right from wrong and you choose right because that's the kind of person you are, and to hope that other people will do that, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's not a negative quality. It's just that people like this take advantage of that, and that's the hard pill to swallow, is that there are people that evil. There are people that manipulative, that they will hone in on those positive qualities in people and they will abuse that. They will exploit that. They'll deceive those people because they know that they will continue to have hope. They know they will continue to forgive them or keep believing in them or look the other way because they want to believe that they're a good person. And don't give up on that part of yourself, because those are good qualities. Those are really positive qualities. It's just that you want to be more discerning who you share those qualities with in the future. And that's the thing that we're all learning now going forward, right? Is meeting new people and having that self-trust first and foremost, like trusting yourself more than you're trusting the words of other people. Having a conversation with someone and maybe they're saying really great things, but having the self-trust to check in with yourself. How does my body feel right now in this conversation? You know, is there something unpleasant in my body? Am I getting a weird feeling in my gut that's telling me something's not right? I mean, it sounds good, but my body is telling me this, not overriding that, right? Like knowing yourself and knowing your intuition and knowing how your body, how your mind, how your intuition communicates with you. You know, maybe it is a very physiological thing that you feel, yes, I do that. So true. Good. You know, recognizing that within yourself, knowing yourself, because the more you know yourself, the more you know your signs, the more you know how your body, mind, and spirit is telling you the reality of that situation. The more you know yourself and trust yourself, the less you will doubt yourself, the less you will get hooked into that, you know, because now when I'm having a first date with someone and they're saying these things, or even if I'm looking online and I'm reading something about someone, those words jump out at me. It's like they're highlighted in red and they're like jumping up because I'm paying attention to myself, because I'm trusting myself. I'm no longer just like blindly believing in other people. You know, I still believe in the good of other people, but I trust myself first and I know myself. And the more you know yourself, the better you'll be able to know others. The better you'll be able to see that coming a mile away and walk away before it ever gets to that point. You know, don't second guess yourself. Don't doubt yourself. Don't put yourself aside, put your feelings, your needs, your beliefs, your sense of reality. Don't second guess that based on what someone else is telling you. You know, it's good to listen to the opinions of other people. And I'm not advocating, you know, just having staunch beliefs and, you know, not listening to anyone else. That's a good thing to do. But for those of us who, you know, developed these codependency patterns of second guessing the self and putting the other person first, for those of us who are in those situations and in those patterns, we have to learn to put ourselves first. We have to learn to trust ourselves first, rather than the beautiful words that someone else is saying, because now we know, right? The gig is up. We know what people are capable of. We know there are so many of these character disturbances out there, people with cluster B personality disorders. I mean, I think the statistics, I think it was you, right, who told me the statistics are 1 in 7 people. And then if you add on top of that, right, if you add on top of that, those of us who are usually surrounded by these kinds of people, there is like a higher density of those people in our energetic field, because we attract the polar opposite. You know, to fix ourselves, to heal ourselves, we attract the opposite, so we can see that mirror and recognize what in ourselves has to change and what we want to change about ourselves. And having that kind of experience with that kind of abusive person is just a huge wake-up call to get our relationship with ourself right. You know, my astrologer calls it our marriage. The marriage is the relationship you have with someone else. The marriage is the relationship you have with yourself. All the parts of yourself, you know, your intuition, your higher self, you know, your gut feelings, like all of that. And that's what you really want to redefine when you're getting out of this abusive relationship, is your relationship with yourself, listening to yourself, honoring yourself, trusting yourself, knowing yourself. And then you don't have to get into that experience again, because you will recognize it a mile away. What other questions do you guys have for today? You're welcome. Okay, if there's no more questions for this session, I'll wrap it up. I will be back here answering questions again at 6 p.m. Pacific time, which is in about a little over 4.5 hours. I'll be back here, same place, answering questions again. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you guys for sharing your questions, for asking these great questions and sharing your vulnerability, because again, these are things that, you know, pretty much everybody who's getting out of these relationships or these abusive situations is struggling with. Like pretty much everybody is struggling with these main things. So thank you guys very much for participating, and I'll see you guys soon. I'm sending you all a big hug.